Luke Bennett's aging pickup rattled noisily along the muddy back road, its windshield wipers squeaking every few seconds in a futile effort to clear the sheets of rain. He couldn't help wondering how he was going to pay for a new set of tires, or if he could even afford the repairs the old truck desperately needed. Times were tough for this widow farmer, and his daughter Emily was depending on him to keep their small homestead afloat. As the storm raged, the farm's concerns weighed heavily on his mind, but little did he know the next few moments would lead him on a path he never could have imagined, a path that would begin on this very night with someone stranded in the pouring rain. It was a single, quiet act of decency that would shake up his entire world, bring a private jet to his doorstep, and eventually change everything he thought he knew about life, love, and the kindness of strangers. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and if this story captures your heart, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I have something extra special in store just for you. The rain-soaked evening had been one of dozens of similar nights in Luke's recent memory. The forecast often brought unpredictable weather to the region, and he was no stranger to seeing dark clouds creep over the horizon at dusk. When the thunderstorms came, he did what he could to fortify the barn, protect his crops, and make sure his daughter had everything she needed. Luke's farm had once been a bustling piece of land with prime soil for vegetables and a small orchard for fruit. Through droughts, floods, and the heartbreak of losing his wife, he had fought to keep it alive. Yet with every year that passed, the farm's condition worsened under financial strains and a cycle of unpredictable conditions. That night, the sky had opened up with a fury, sending rivulets of water cascading down the gullies along the unpaved roads. By the time Luke left his driveway in an attempt to fetch a few supplies from a distant feed store, the ruts in the road had turned into muddy channels that jostled the truck from side to side. Emily had stayed behind in the modest farmhouse, reading through her lessons at the rickety kitchen table. She was only 8, bright and curious, with her mother's warm eyes and a spirit that never failed to remind Luke of the wife he missed every day. His plan had been to rush to the feed store before it closed so he could have extra grain to tide him over the next week, but he was quickly rethinking that plan as the sky's fury grew more intense. The truck's ancient headlights cut through the darkness, revealing only the endless deluge that hammered the windshield. He was debating turning around when he thought he saw something on the side of the road. At first, he told himself it was probably just a trick of the light, a fence post or a downed tree. But as he got closer, the beam illuminated a silhouette in a dripping coat, waving an arm in an attempt to flag him down. Luke's heart twisted at the sight of a stranger out in this storm. He could have passed by, but that wasn't who he was. He eased off the accelerator and pulled over as gently as he could, nearly sliding into the soggy ditch that threatened to swallow his tires. The stranger hurried to the driver's side window, face hidden by the shadow of a hood. All he could see was the faint gleam of her eyes and the trembling in her posture as the wind whipped around them. When he cracked the window, the stranger's voice was almost swallowed by the rain. She called out, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but my rental car is stuck around the bend. I can't get it to move in the mud. I tried calling for roadside assistance, but the cell signal here is terrible." Luke shoved the door open with effort, letting in a gust of rain. "Ma'am, get in. You're gonna catch a chill out there." She hurried inside. Her coat dripped onto the cracked vinyl seat, but Luke didn't care. The warmth of another human presence actually relieved some of the tension he'd felt all night. He flicked on the overhead light for a better look at the stranger. She had dark, damp hair plastered to her cheeks, and her eyes, though frightened and frustrated, were bright and focused. Her features were elegant, though it was obvious she wasn't used to these kinds of conditions. He couldn't help noticing that her nails were neatly manicured, her hands trembling as she removed the soaked hood. She tried to offer him a shaky smile. "I appreciate your help so much. I didn't think anyone else would be on this road." Luke nodded, shutting off the overhead light to preserve the truck's limited battery power. "Are you hurt, miss?" She shook her head. "I'm fine, just cold and completely stranded." She introduced herself politely as Sierra, though she didn't volunteer a last name. He didn't push her for details. He understood what it felt like to be vulnerable and alone, and right now, she was in a tough spot. "Well, Sierra, let's see what we can do. Where exactly is your car?" She pointed behind them, explaining that she had driven out here by mistake, that the GPS on her phone led her astray. She had hoped to find a small local inn, but the directions had taken her onto this muddy back route instead. Luke offered to drive around the bend so they could try to tow the car out, but once they reached the spot, he saw how deeply her small rental was buried in the mud. The back wheels were practically sunk to the hubcaps, and with the storm in full force, the prospect of pulling it free seemed futile. Luke sighed. I have a rope in the back, but I'm not sure it'll help in this quagmire. The ground is too soft. We'll probably end up getting both vehicles stuck. Sierra's shoulders slumped in dismay. I'm not sure what else to do. The rental company is an hour away, and I can't get a single bar of service here. Luke thought for a moment, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. He had half a mind to try anyway, but the sensible side of him knew the risk of losing his own truck in the mud wasn't worth it. If he lost his only means of transportation, he and Emily would be in dire straits. Even so, leaving Sierra alone in the storm wasn't an option. He turned to her. I can drop you off in town. There's a small motel near the feed store, though it's a bit rundown. Or, well, if you don't mind a simpler arrangement, my daughter and I have a spare room at the farmhouse. Not the most comfortable, but it's a roof, and the storm's not likely to let up. Sierra hesitated, clearly uncertain about imposing on this stranger's home, but when the thunder boomed, making the truck window shudder, she realized she had no better alternative. I don't want to trouble you. Maybe if there's an inn, I could stay there for the night. Luke nodded. All right, I'll take you into town and see if they have a vacancy. They tried the closest motel, which was indeed run down, its neon sign flickering in the rain. A sleepy desk clerk in a flannel shirt frowned apologetically. Every room was booked, apparently by folks fleeing the storm or passing through the region. Without another option, Sierra reluctantly agreed to accept Luke's invitation, promising him that she would pay him for the inconvenience. He refused her money with a gentle shake of his head. No need, ma'am. You just look like you need a roof and some dry clothes. The drive to the farm took longer than usual due to the downpour. The windows fogged up, and Luke had to wipe the glass with an old rag every few minutes to keep the road in view. Sierra stared out at the darkness, her mind surely buzzing with questions. From time to time, she glanced at Luke, as if trying to figure out who he was. His hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, his clothes stained by the day's tasks. He seemed kind, but she noticed a certain heaviness in his eyes, an exhaustion that went beyond the typical weight of a long, rainy day. She wondered what his story might be, but decided it was best not to pry. By the time they reached the farmhouse, Emily was waiting anxiously at the front window, squinting through the rain. She noticed the unfamiliar figure climbing out of her father's truck, and her eyes widened with curiosity. As soon as Luke and Sierra entered the front door, the warm glow of the living room lamp surrounded them. Emily approached shyly, hugging a stuffed rabbit. Luke offered her a small smile. Honey, this is Sierra. She got stuck on the road. She'll be staying here tonight so she doesn't freeze out there. Emily nodded. Okay, hi, she said softly, stepping aside to let them pass. The house wasn't large, but it had a cozy living room with a threadbare sofa and a bookshelf stuffed with worn novels. The kitchen opened onto a small dining area, where a meager supper still sat on the table, forgotten when Luke had dashed out to catch the feed store. Sierra, drenched from head to toe, looked around, feeling self-conscious as water dripped onto the scuffed floor. She tried to apologize for the inconvenience, but Luke waved off her concerns. Let's find you something dry. There might be some old clothes of my wife's. She passed a few years back, but I think I kept a few boxes of her things upstairs, if you don't mind. She nodded, touched by his willingness to go so far out of his way. Thank you. I'll pay for anything I use. I promise. Luke shook his head. Don't worry about that. He showed her to a small guest room, which had pale yellow walls and a narrow bed with a hand-sewn quilt. He set a stack of towels on the dresser, then gently placed a cardboard box that read Hannah's clothes on the bed. I'm sorry if it feels personal. I just never had the heart to get rid of everything. Maybe something here will fit you. Sierra sensed the sorrow behind his words. She wasn't sure what had happened to his wife, but the faint catch in his throat told her it had been a devastating loss. She placed a hand on the cardboard flaps, nodding in gratitude. You're being incredibly kind. Thank you, Luke. He gave a curt nod, retreating to let her change. While she rummaged through the box, she found a few simple dresses and sweaters. They were a bit out of date, but they seemed comfortable. She chose a soft flannel button-down shirt and some loose-fitting pants, then toweled off her hair as best she could. She felt a pang of sadness for this unknown woman named Hannah who had once lived here. There was a gentleness in the textures of the clothes, as though they had been well cared for. When Sierra emerged, Luke's eyes flickered with a distant emotion as he recognized the clothing on someone new, but he quickly masked it. He didn't want to burden the stranger with his grief. Instead, he guided her toward the living room, where Emily was attempting to read a library book under a flickering lamp. "I'll make you some tea," Luke offered. "Then we can talk about what to do tomorrow. Maybe we can dig out your car, or at least call for a tow once the storm calms down." Sierra sank onto the couch, exhaustion finally hitting her. She accepted the tea with both hands. It tasted faintly of chamomile and honey, bringing warmth to her chilled bones. Emily crept closer, curiosity shining in her eyes. "Is your car really stuck?" she asked, twisting the worn ear of her plush rabbit. Sierra nodded, offering a tired smile. "I took a wrong turn and ended up in a puddle that turned into a swamp." Emily giggled softly. "That happens a lot around here when it rains." She tilted her head, gazing at Sierra's manicured hands. "Are you from a city?" Sierra shifted. She wasn't sure how much to reveal. "Yes, from a bigger city. I was on my way to a business meeting, you could say." Luke cleared his throat, sensing that Sierra might not want to delve into details. "We'll get everything sorted out tomorrow. In the meantime, you can rest here. The roof leaks a bit in the far corner, so keep an eye out if you hear drips. I put a bucket there." Sierra's eyes roamed the modest living space. The paint was peeling in places, the furniture well worn. She saw a picture on the mantel of Luke, Emily, and a young woman with bright eyes and a gentle smile. That must be Hannah, she thought, noting the sweet resemblance in the daughter's face. She also noted the exhaustion that lined Luke's features, the quiet resignation of a man who had known hardship. For a while, they chatted about small matters, the weather, the local area, how the farming business had its ups and downs. Sierra found it surprisingly easy to talk to Luke, who spoke plainly and without judgment. He asked a few polite questions about her plans, but didn't pry when she gave vague answers. She was grateful for that, for it had been a long time since she'd encountered someone who seemed to expect nothing in return. Eventually, Luke rose from his seat, stifling a yawn. "It's late. Emily, time for bed." The girl complained softly that she wasn't tired, but it was clear she could barely keep her eyes open. Luke turned to Sierra. "You should get some rest too. If you need anything, my room is down the hall." She nodded, placing her tea on a small coffee table. "Thank you. Good night." When she settled into the guest bed, she could hear the distant patter of rain on the roof. Occasionally, a gust of wind rattled the windows, and she remembered her car stranded in that muddy ditch. She also remembered Luke's kindness and felt a strange sense of comfort. She realized she hadn't even told him her last name. Perhaps that was best for now. Her life in the city was complicated, and she was relieved not to have to explain who she was or why a wealthy woman like her would be driving alone on a back road. She had come to this region for reasons that felt deeply personal, reasons she couldn't share with strangers. Sleep came slowly as she mulled over the gentle family she had stumbled upon. Luke's generosity stirred something within her, a yearning she hadn't known she carried. The swirling thoughts eventually lulled her into slumber, the battered truck outside bearing silent witness to the unusual bond forming under one tattered farmhouse roof. Morning arrived with soft sunlight filtering through the threadbare curtains. The storm had passed, leaving behind damp grass and puddles. Sierra woke to the sound of clucking chickens and the distant hum of a tractor. She rose, brushing the flannel shirt until the wrinkles somewhat smoothed out, then ventured into the living room. She found Emily curled up on the sofa with her rabbit, flipping through an old picture book, while Luke prepared scrambled eggs on a small skillet in the adjacent kitchen. The aroma of the food reminded Sierra of how hungry she was. Luke glanced over his shoulder and greeted her with a small nod. "Morning. Hope you slept okay." She approached with a tentative smile. "Surprisingly well. Thank you for everything." He dished up the eggs onto 3 plates, adding toast that was slightly burnt at the edges. That's about all we've got this morning. The storm took out our telephone line again, so I can't place any calls until it's fixed. I figure we can drive into town after breakfast, see if we can find someone to help with your car, and pick up a few parts for my truck while we're at it. Sierra nodded, sitting at the small wooden table. Emily joined them, chattering about the leftover puddles outside that might be good for splashing. Luke gently reminded her that there was more work to be done than playing in puddles, but she shot him a mischievous grin. Sierra found herself smiling at their banter, struck by the love that clearly existed in this small family. While they ate, Sierra wondered if she should reveal more about herself, but she decided against it. She wasn't sure how Luke would react if he knew she was an heiress. She also thought about how, in a strange way, it was nice to be treated like an ordinary traveler. At home, everyone knew her last name, and it carried weight she had never asked for. Here, she was just Sierra, a stranger who needed help. After cleaning up, Luke handed Sierra a slightly oversized raincoat and motioned for her to follow him to the truck. Emily trailed behind them, carrying her stuffed rabbit. They piled into the vehicle, the engine sputtering a bit before roaring to life. Driving down the now muddy but navigable road, they soon arrived at the spot where her rental car was lodged. Sure enough, it was still half buried, and Luke frowned as he stepped out to inspect it. It might take a tow truck with a decent winch to pull it out, he said. Let's go into town. There's a mechanic named Troy who has the equipment we'd need. Sierra tried calling the rental company again, but there was no signal in this patch of farmland. Sighing, she hopped back in Luke's truck, letting him drive them to the small business district. It was little more than one main street, with a diner, a feed store, a general store, and a repair shop. Luke parked near the repair shop, and a big man with grease-stained hands emerged to greet them. Troy recognized Luke with a warm handshake but cast a curious glance at Sierra. She introduced herself simply as Sierra, not elaborating. Luke explained the predicament with the rental car, and Troy nodded. I can bring my tow rig out there for a couple hundred, he offered. Assuming the axle's not busted, we can get it out by afternoon. Sierra agreed without hesitation, surprising Luke, who knew that for many in this community, $200 was a hefty sum. She peeled off some cash from her wallet. Luke noticed the thickness of her billfold, but he said nothing. She quickly stuffed the rest back into her pocket, not wanting to flash too much money around. Troy promised he'd head out in about an hour, and in the meantime, Luke suggested they wait at the diner across the street for a hot meal or some coffee. Sierra loved the old-fashioned charm of the place, with a chalkboard menu listing basic comfort foods. Emily perked up at the mention of milkshakes, and though Luke hesitated, checking his own funds, Sierra insisted on treating them. They slid into a booth near the window, the vinyl seats sticking to their clothes. A friendly waitress came by with a pot of coffee. Sierra smiled, placing an order for pancakes for Emily, coffee for Luke, and a simple soup for herself. Luke put aside his pride and accepted Sierra's offer to pay, reminding himself he was only letting her do so because she was insistent. He felt a little uneasy about it, but something about her quiet sincerity made him more comfortable. While they waited for the food, Sierra kept glancing out the window at the small, sleepy town. She asked Luke how long he had lived here, and he explained that he was born on his family's farm and had spent his entire life working the land. She learned that his wife, Hannah, had passed away from an illness a few years back, leaving him to raise Emily alone. Times had gotten even tougher since then, with mounting debts and unpredictable weather patterns hitting his crops hard. As he spoke, his voice was firm, but tinged with an undercurrent of sadness. Sierra listened intently, taking note of the simple dreams he still held. He wanted to keep the farm afloat long enough for Emily to grow up in a safe, stable environment, the same place where Hannah's memory lingered in every corner of the house. Something about Luke's resilience resonated with Sierra, who had been dealing with her own private burdens. She had come to this region to escape certain expectations, wanting to explore a potential business investment that might help her family's empire. Yet now she felt drawn to a more personal mission, understanding the heart of a farmer who quietly carried the weight of fatherhood and legacy on his shoulders. Emily devoured her pancakes, leaving smudges of syrup on her cheeks. Luke sipped his coffee and seemed to loosen up a bit, occasionally flashing a small smile in Sierra's direction. Sierra wondered if Luke's stoicism was his shield against the harshness of life. In her own world, people wore different kinds of masks. But here, out in farmland, the struggle was raw and unhidden. She found it strangely refreshing. By the time they finished the meal, Troy appeared outside the diner window, waving them over to his tow truck. "All set to head out," he called. Sierra stood, and Luke followed, leading Emily by the hand. After paying, they hopped back in Luke's truck and followed Troy's rig to the site of the stranded rental car. As predicted, the vehicle was yanked free within minutes. The wheels spun mud everywhere, but eventually it lurched onto firmer ground. Sierra gave a sigh of relief, checking for damage. It looked dirty but otherwise intact. Troy gave the fender a once-over. "You're lucky it didn't snap anything important. That'll be another $50 for cleaning the undercarriage if you want it." Sierra shrugged. "Sure. Do what you have to do. I can't drive around with chunks of mud falling off." Luke observed the interaction silently, noticing how freely Sierra handled the extra expenses. When Troy drove off to his shop, she prepared to follow in the rental. Luke turned to her. "You'll be heading out then, I guess?" Sierra held the car keys in her hand, but she hesitated. She looked at Luke, at the battered truck, then at Emily, who clung shyly to her father's leg. "You've been so kind to me. The storm is gone, so I should probably go, but I just wanted to say thank you properly." Luke rubbed the back of his neck, not sure how to respond. "I'm glad I could help." After a brief, awkward pause, Sierra managed a gentle grin. "Luke, I have your phone number, right? Actually, come to think of it, I don't think we ever exchanged numbers. And you said your landline is down." He shrugged. "It's not a big deal, ma'am. We'll be fine." Something about his dismissal struck her. She tried to think of a reason to maintain contact. "I'm staying in the area for a few days. Maybe I can drop by again to pay you back for letting me stay over." He lifted a hand in protest. "You don't owe me anything." She squared her shoulders. "I do, actually, if you'll accept it. You spent your time, shared your wife's clothes, gave me a place to sleep, and you didn't have to. Let me at least do something. Maybe I can cook dinner for you both tomorrow. I'm not the best cook, but I can manage a halfway decent meal." Luke was surprised by the offer, as was Emily, who glanced up with a spark of excitement. She rarely saw anyone new in their home. Before Luke could politely decline, he caught that hopeful look in Emily's eyes and paused. He realized that maybe, just maybe, a bit of generosity in return wouldn't hurt. "Well, I guess if you really want to, we'll be around. There's always chores to do, but we're usually back at the house by evening." Sierra smiled. "Great. I'll come by around 6 tomorrow." Luke nodded, not entirely sure what he was getting into, but not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm. She got into her rental car, carefully maneuvering it back onto the road. After a moment, she rolled down the window and called out a final thank you. Then she drove off, leaving Luke with a swirl of thoughts. He lifted Emily into the truck, securing her seatbelt before climbing behind the wheel. On the short drive home, he wrestled with conflicting emotions. The last thing he wanted was to accept charity, but the sincerity in Sierra's eyes made it seem more like a genuine desire to repay kindness. A small part of him also recognized that he had enjoyed her company, fleeting as it was. People rarely took time to notice him as anything more than a struggling farmer or a single dad, let alone offer to cook him a meal. Back at the farm, they discovered that the day's sunshine had begun drying out some of the mud, leaving the yard littered with small lakes of water. Luke changed into work clothes and spent the afternoon tending to the animals, cleaning stalls, and checking on his battered orchard. Emily helped as best she could, though she occasionally wandered off to stomp in leftover puddles. The chores kept Luke's mind busy, but periodically, his thoughts returned to Sierra, the unexpected visitor who had crashed into his life. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Luke found himself standing by the living room window, staring at the shadowy outline of the fields. The memory of Sierra wearing Hannah's flannel shirt tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't fully articulate. It was the first time he'd seen another woman in those clothes, and it reminded him both of his deep loss and the gentle warmth this stranger had brought to their home. A single question lingered. Who was she? really. She'd had an air of mystery about her, as if she wasn't used to living so simply. Yet she'd handled adversity on that muddy road with far more grace than many of the travelers who passed through. He sighed, turning away from the window. There were more immediate concerns in his life: bills, repairs, feeding livestock, raising Emily. A single dinner invitation shouldn't complicate things, but he couldn't deny that part of him was curious to see if she'd really show up the next day. As for Sierra, she spent the rest of the day dealing with the rental paperwork at Troy's shop, then checking into a small inn near the next town over. Once there, she let out a weary breath and finally pulled out her phone. Now that she had stable reception, she had dozens of missed messages, many from her family's business associates and her father's staff. She scrolled through them, noting with some amusement that they had been frantic when she went off the grid. But she ignored the bulk of them for now, responding only to let them know she was safe and that she needed some space. A mixture of relief and nervousness washed over her. She was here to scout a piece of land for potential development, in the hopes that it could be turned into a sustainable project that matched her family's philanthropic goals. Her father, a wealthy magnate named Robert James, had insisted that she learn the ropes of business by handling real estate deals. Yet, Sierra's heart wasn't fully committed to the corporate world. She yearned for something more grounded, more genuine, something she could call her own. Meeting Luke had triggered a longing inside her to truly understand the struggles and triumphs of ordinary people, people who work the earth with their own two hands. She found her thoughts drifting back to the battered truck, the worn expression on Luke's face, and the sweet innocence of Emily. A small smile curved her lips. Tomorrow, she would keep her promise. She wanted to know more about their life, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to help them that wasn't just about paying back a debt. The next day dawned clear, the air fresh from the dissipated storm. Luke and Emily rose at daybreak, as usual, to tend the farm. They had no illusions that the day would be easy. There were fences to fix, feed to distribute, weeds to pull. By noon, Luke's shoulders were sore from hauling equipment. Emily flitted in and out of the barn, trying to help where she could, but at her age, she was more of a moral supporter than a true farmhand. Still, Luke appreciated her presence. She reminded him there was more to life than endless debt and chores. He paused midday to look at the front drive. He half expected a fancy car or another rental to appear. Yet the hours passed, the chores continued, and the road remained empty. By mid-afternoon, he convinced himself that Sierra must have changed her mind. He told himself it was fine, that he didn't need a stranger's cooking or her pity. Yet a small tinge of disappointment gnawed at him. Around 5:30 in the evening, while he was finishing up in the barn, he heard the distant hum of an engine. He froze, hay clinging to his gloves, and peered out. Sure enough, a clean, silver sedan was carefully navigating the rutted path. It pulled up to the front porch, and Sierra stepped out, holding a bag of groceries in one hand and some sort of cooking pot in the other. Luke watched silently from the barn door, wiping a trickle of sweat from his brow as she carefully made her way toward the porch. Emily, who had been brushing the old mirror in a corner of the barn, perked up. "She came back," she whispered excitedly, dropping the brush to scurry outside. Luke followed more slowly, trying to mask his own relief. Sierra waved at him, hefting the grocery bag. "I wasn't sure what you had in the house, so I brought a few things. Hope you don't mind." Luke tugged off his gloves, tucking them into the back pocket of his worn jeans. "You found the place okay?" She nodded, a trace of laughter lighting her eyes. "I navigated more carefully this time. No more dirt roads in the rain." Emily bounded up, beaming. "Hi, you really came. Did you bring anything for dinner?" Sierra crouched to the girl's level, ruffling her hair gently. "I sure did. How does chicken stew sound?" Emily's eyes lit up. "That sounds so good. Daddy doesn't make stew too often because it takes forever." Luke felt a flicker of embarrassment. "She's right. It takes a while, and I usually don't have time. But if you're up for it, we have a stove that sometimes works." Sierra offered a crooked grin. "I like a challenge." Luke stepped forward to take the groceries from her. He led her into the kitchen, which still bore the marks of the previous day's storm. A small leak had stained part of the ceiling, and there was a faint, musty smell from where water had seeped in. Sierra pretended not to notice, though she felt a pang of sympathy. The house was undeniably in need of repairs. She placed her bag on the small counter, pulling out chicken, vegetables, broth, and some spices she'd picked up at the store. She looked around for a cutting board and found a well-worn one next to a dull knife. Rolling up her sleeves, she set to work, chopping carrots and onions, rinsing off potatoes in the sink. Emily hovered at her elbow, asking questions about how to cut vegetables. While Sierra worked, Luke lingered in the background, feeling oddly restless. He wasn't used to someone else taking over his kitchen, let alone cooking a full meal for him and his daughter. He finally cleared his throat and offered to help. Sierra gave him the dull knife and asked him to slice the chicken while she handled the rest. The two worked in quiet harmony, with Emily occasionally piping in with questions or observations. Once the stew was simmering on the stove, Sierra took a moment to breathe. She had to guess on the seasoning, but it smelled delicious. She turned to Luke, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "Why don't you go shower or rest for a bit? You must be tired from working. This will take a while to cook." He considered it, then nodded. "I am a bit worn. Emily, be good. Don't bother Miss Sierra too much." Emily giggled and promised to help with anything Sierra needed. Luke disappeared down the hall, leaving the two alone in the quiet kitchen. Emily talked about her favorite books, her horse, and how she missed her mother. Sierra listened sympathetically, aware of how gently the child spoke about her mom. It was clear that Emily held on to precious memories, but also yearned for a feminine figure to share everyday moments. Eventually, Sierra noticed Emily yawning, so she nudged her toward the living room, telling her to watch something on the small TV until dinner was ready. As the stew bubbled softly, Sierra found her thoughts drifting again. She wondered what it must be like for Luke to shoulder everything alone. She also thought about her own father, who insisted on molding her into the perfect heiress, sending her to close real estate deals or examine farmland in an impersonal manner. She couldn't deny the sense of conflict within herself, torn between loyalty to her family and a desire for something more authentic. When Luke returned, hair damp and wearing a fresh shirt, the stew was nearly ready. The delicious aroma filled the house, making even his tired shoulders lift in anticipation. Sierra handed him a spoon to do a taste test. He blew on it and tried a cautious sip. His eyes widened slightly. Then he cleared his throat to hide his surprise. That's pretty good," Sierra chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." Emily scurried in, sniffing the air eagerly. "It smells so good. Can we eat now?" Luke set the table while Sierra ladled the stew into bowls. They sat together, and for a while the only sounds were the clink of spoons against the bowls and the appreciative murmurs at each bite. Emily devoured her portion quickly, proclaiming it the best stew she'd ever tasted. That made Sierra grin, though she suspected that, in truth, the girl rarely got to taste homemade meals like this. Once their bowls were nearly empty, Luke leaned back, a satisfied look crossing his features. "Thank you. That was very kind of you." Sierra shrugged. "It's the least I could do after everything you did for me." An awkward silence settled, as if they both wanted to say something more but weren't sure how to proceed. Emily, oblivious to the adult tension, hopped off her chair and asked Sierra if they could play a board game. Luke started to say they needed to pick up the dishes first, but Sierra waved it off. "I'll clean up in a moment. Let me see what game you have." Emily raced into the living room, rummaging through a small shelf. She pulled out a battered box that once contained a puzzle. "I can't find all the pieces, but I like to try anyway." Sierra laughed softly, setting the box on the coffee table. She kneeled beside Emily and began sorting through the puzzle pieces. Luke stood by the kitchen sink, clearing bowls and running water over them. But every so often, he looked over, watching Sierra share a simple moment with his daughter. A flicker of gratitude touched him. He hadn't realized how lonely the house could feel until someone new walked in and filled the silence. While Emily tried to fit pieces together, Sierra offered tips on matching colors and shapes. Occasionally, Emily would ask about life in the city, but Sierra kept her answers vague. She mentioned bright lights, tall buildings, and busy streets, leaving out the part where she was the daughter of a famous billionaire. She had a sense that Luke wasn't one to be impressed by big names or wealth anyway. Eventually, the puzzle-making ended with about a quarter of the pieces discovered missing. Emily yawned widely, and Luke took that as a cue to nudge her toward bed. Sierra helped clean up the coffee table, then moved back to the kitchen, where she insisted on washing the dishes. Luke tried to intervene, but she refused, saying, "I made the mess, I'll clean it." Her presence in the kitchen made Luke slightly uneasy. Hannah used to wash dishes while he dried them, and he had grown accustomed to doing them alone after she passed. Yet there was something comforting in seeing another person at the sink, humming softly under her breath. Once the plates and utensils were put away, she found a rag and wiped down the counters. The entire scene felt strangely domestic, as if she belonged there. Eventually, she hung the rag by the sink and turned to face Luke. "I should probably head back now. I'm staying in a motel a few miles away." He nodded, walking her to the door. The night air was crisp, and crickets chirped in the distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke, simply taking in the moonlit view of the farmland. The tension was a mixture of gratitude and a budding connection they both were hesitant to label. Luke cleared his throat. "I appreciate this. Really. You made Emily's day. And the stew was amazing." Sierra shifted her weight. "I'm glad. She's a sweet girl. You're lucky to have her." He gazed across the dark fields. "She's my world. Everything I do is for her, though it feels like I'm always falling short." Sierra was quiet for a moment. "From what I've seen, you're doing a good job. She's happy and she loves you. That's more than what a lot of kids have." He looked down at his feet, wrestling with a tangle of insecurities he seldom voiced. "Thank you," he murmured, then mustered a polite smile. "Drive safe." Sierra's chest felt tight as she walked to her car. She had just witnessed a man carrying the weight of fatherhood and financial hardship on his shoulders, yet still opening his home and heart to a stranger. Part of her wanted to help him more, but she worried about overstepping. She also worried about how he might react if he discovered her true identity. Still, she made a silent vow that she wouldn't just walk out of his life. Her father's business matters could wait a little longer. She wanted to see if there was a chance she could do something meaningful, not just for Luke, but for Emily and the land they called home. The following days found Sierra more entangled in local matters than she had planned. She discovered a listing for farmland that was up for auction soon, a large parcel that had once belonged to an old rancher with no family. Her father's corporation had set its sights on this land for a commercial venture. Sierra, on her father's directive, was supposed to evaluate its potential and return with a recommendation. She had assumed that would be her main priority. But she found herself drawn back to Luke's smaller farm, helping him with odd tasks, learning about his processes, even gleaning little bits of wisdom from him about planting cycles and irrigation. Luke was initially hesitant about her presence, uncertain why a random traveler would keep coming back to spend time with them, yet Emily's excitement at seeing Sierra was impossible to ignore. As the days passed, he began to relax, enjoying the small glimpses of laughter and warmth Sierra brought into their home. They were not overtly affectionate, both were guarded in their own ways, but a mutual respect and curiosity grew with each shared moment. On one of these visits, Sierra noticed a stack of overdue bills on the kitchen table. Luke had been trying to shield them from view, but she caught the letters from the bank, the bright final notice stamps. She realized the farm was on the brink of foreclosure. She felt a stab of sympathy and wondered if there was a way she could intervene. But Luke was proud, and she sensed that any direct offer of money would wound his pride. Instead, she tried to think of a subtler approach. Perhaps she could pay for repairs under the guise of simply improving something she used. Or maybe she could connect him with a better buyer for his produce. The gears in her mind turned as she searched for a solution that wouldn't feel like charity. Meanwhile, Luke's own mind was spinning. In all these years, nobody had taken such an interest in his farm, let alone tried to help. It tugged at the lonely corners of his heart, reminding him of what it felt like to have a partner. Yet, he couldn't shake the fear that letting someone in again might lead to more pain, the way losing Hannah had nearly broken him. One afternoon, after Sierra helped him fix a broken fence post near the orchard, they walked through the rows of scraggly fruit trees. the sun beating down on their backs. Emily was at the house, reading a library book. Sierra noted that some of the trees looked diseased, their leaves curling. She asked him about it. He explained that a fungal outbreak had taken hold years ago, and without the funds for proper treatments, parts of the orchard were slowly dying. Sierra frowned, recalling a conversation with a horticultural specialist she'd met at a conference. She wondered if she could discreetly reach out to that specialist, see about having them come out to help Luke. But she knew he might bristle if it felt like someone was stepping in to fix his problems. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Luke paused, looking at her with a question in his eyes. He'd been grappling with it for days now. "Sierra, can I ask you something?" She turned, heart fluttering at the seriousness in his tone. "Of course. Anything." He hesitated. "Why are you really here? You said you took a wrong turn that night, but you're still in the area. You show up at my door, help me fix fences, cook meals. You're obviously not from around here. Are you investigating something? Or do you just, I don't know." His question was reasonable. She bit her lip, wondering if she should tell him about her father's business interests, but that might change how he saw her. She decided to offer a partial truth, carefully edited. "I have some background in property development, so I originally came to evaluate some local farmland for a potential purchase, but I realized I needed to learn more about how farms actually function, so I've spent time with you to get a real sense of the day-to-day challenges. I hope that doesn't sound manipulative." Luke studied her, his gaze steady. "No, it's honest. I appreciate that." He paused. "So you're planning on making a big farm out here? Or building something else?" She shrugged. "I'm not certain yet. Part of me wonders if it's possible to help local farmers instead, to partner up with them in some beneficial arrangement. I don't like the idea of displacing people. I'm more interested in cooperation." Luke's face revealed a flicker of relief. "I see. That's good to hear. We've had enough big corporations come around, wanting to buy up land for who knows what. It never works out well for families like mine." Sierra nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her father's instructions. He had specifically mentioned that if the farmland proved profitable for a commercial center, they should proceed quickly. But the notion of uprooting small farmers or forcing them out felt wrong, especially after seeing Luke's struggles firsthand. She realized she was beginning to question her role in her father's empire. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Luke, if you ever need help with the orchard, I might know someone who can advise on the fungus issue. It might help save some trees." He studied her for a moment. "I appreciate it. I truly do. I guess it can't hurt to ask." Sierra felt a rush of relief that he was open to the idea. She mentally made a note to call her contact when she returned to her motel. She also felt her heart tighten a bit, worried about how quickly she was becoming attached to these people, to this place. That evening, Sierra returned to the motel and placed a discreet phone call to a horticulturist named Dr. Ronald Green. He remembered her from a sustainability conference and agreed to take a look at the orchard if she could cover his travel expenses. She quickly arranged it, planning to keep Luke in the loop. She knew it was a big step, but if it could save his orchard, maybe it would buy him enough time to stabilize finances. In the days leading up to Dr. Green's visit, Sierra spent more time with Luke and Emily. They went through old family photos, reorganized part of the barn, and even took a brief trip into town to buy feed supplies. During these moments, Sierra saw glimpses of what family life might be like if she let herself belong here. She was cautious with her emotions, uncertain if Luke felt anything more than gratitude and friendship. But their eyes sometimes lingered on each other, and every so often, an accidental brush of hands sent a spark through her. She sensed that something was blooming between them, fragile and unspoken. Meanwhile, on the financial front, Luke's situation grew more precarious. The bank was pressing him, and he had only weeks left to make a payment. Unaware of the tension building inside him, Sierra continued her attempts to help when Dr. Green finally arrived. Luke was a bit wary at first, but he eventually allowed the specialist to examine the orchard. After a thorough inspection, Dr. Green explained that with a proper treatment and a bit of luck, many of the trees could be salvaged. But It wouldn't be cheap. He offered to supply some specialized sprays at cost, plus suggest a new pruning regimen to maximize healthy growth. Sierra told Luke she would cover the initial cost of the treatment, framing it as a business investment. She said if the orchard could produce more fruit next season, he could pay her back in installments. Luke mulled over the arrangement. It made him uneasy, but Dr. Green's confident assurances swayed him to accept the help. This orchard was one of his last hopes to keep the farm afloat. That night, as Sierra prepared to leave, Luke walked her to her car. The moon was bright overhead, illuminating the lines of worry on his face. She could sense that he felt conflicted about accepting her money, even though it was couched as an investment. "I'm not used to letting people bail me out," he admitted quietly. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I'm not bailing you out. I'm investing in your future harvest. You'll pay me back once you sell the produce. Look at it like a partnership." His gaze held hers in the silvery light. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." A surge of warmth spread through Sierra's chest. She recognized the hint of vulnerability in his eyes, the weight of a man who had been alone in his struggles for too long. She wanted to tell him he had already repaid her 100 times over by letting her into this corner of his world. Instead, she simply said, "We'll figure it out." A moment of electric silence passed between them until the distant sounds of a restless farm animal broke the tension. Sierra smiled softly, stepping back and sliding into her car. As she drove away, her heart thudded in her chest. She suspected she might be crossing the boundary from friendship into something deeper, something that could complicate both their lives. Yet the thought of returning to the city, to her old routines, without seeing this through, made her chest ache. In the following week, Dr. Green set up a schedule to treat the orchard. Luke and Sierra worked alongside him, carefully applying fungicides, pruning dead branches, and surveying every row of trees. Despite the hard labor, Sierra found the work rewarding, especially when Emily joined in with her small watering can, determined to help. Luke's expression softened whenever he saw them together, the quiet wonder of a man who realized how close to a real family moment they were. But no good deed comes without challenges. As Sierra was leaving the farm one afternoon, she received a call on her phone. It was her father's assistant, telling her that Robert James was in town. He had decided to pay a personal visit to see how the farmland deal was progressing. Sierra's stomach tightened. She had to meet him at a nearby hotel and provide a status report. That evening, she arrived at the upscale hotel lounge, feeling torn between two worlds. There sat her father, a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and an air of authority. He rose to greet her, but his eyes flicked over her rumpled work jeans, the dried mud on her boots. "You look very rural," he commented with faint disapproval. Sierra shrugged, refusing to feel ashamed. "I've been hands-on with a local farmer. I'm learning the details of orchard management." He nodded, motioning for her to sit. "I see. So how is the project? Will we be acquiring the large parcel soon?" She paused, stirring the iced tea she'd ordered. "That's one possibility, but the land we're looking at is near some small farms that are struggling. I think we might do better if we invest in partnerships with them, help them modernize, and then incorporate a sustainable approach that fits with the environment." Her father's brow furrowed. "That's not the plan I had in mind. We need a commercial venture to maximize returns, perhaps a distribution center or a processing plant. If these small farms can't keep up, we shouldn't waste time propping them up." Sierra bristled, recalling Luke's determination and heartbreak. "They can keep up if they have the right support. And the orchard I've been working on?" Robert James raised a hand. "Wait, orchard? You're spending your time on an orchard that doesn't even belong to us?" "Sierra, we have to focus on the property that's actually on the market." She fought to keep her voice steady. "I found a farmer who's in trouble. If we help him, we can demonstrate a model of sustainable farming that could be applied on a larger scale. We could brand ourselves as a socially responsible corporation. It might look good for our public image." He exhaled, scanning her expression. "You sound personally invested. Don't forget you're here as a representative of the James family. I need results, not sentiment." She bit her lip, resisting the urge to lash out. "I'm meeting with the owners of that large parcel tomorrow. but I believe it's more beneficial in the long run if we approach this region with respect for the existing farmers. Her father sipped his coffee, then relented with a sigh. Fine. Present me with a concrete plan by the end of the week. Show me numbers. If it's viable, we'll talk. But do not let personal entanglements cloud your judgment. Is that clear? She nodded, her stomach churning. She knew that personal entanglements were exactly what she was sliding into, but she had no intention of retreating. She wanted to find a way to save Luke's farm, or at least give him a fighting chance. She parted ways with her father, promising him a draft proposal soon. As she left the hotel, she felt the weight of the city pressing against the open sky of the farmland she'd come to love. Back at her motel, Sierra crafted a preliminary report, highlighting a sustainable orchard project that could yield positive press and long-term benefits. She included an overview of how local farmers could partner with the James Corporation to grow produce that would then be distributed through larger networks. It was an idealistic vision, but she believed in it. She just wasn't sure if her father would ever truly get on board. Meanwhile, Luke's stress intensified. He received another terse letter from the bank threatening foreclosure if he didn't make a significant payment soon. He worked late into the night, scanning every acre of his property for something he could sell to raise funds. He contemplated letting go of a portion of his livestock, maybe even selling some equipment, but everything he owned was integral to the farm's operation. Without a miracle, he would lose it all. He tried not to let Sierra sense his despair. Whenever she came by to check on the orchard, he mustered a friendly smile. They shared simple lunches, talked about orchard management, and watched Emily chase the barn cat around. But in the back of his mind, the ticking clock of unpaid bills loomed large. One day, Sierra gently prodded him, sensing his unease. "Luke, is everything okay? You seem distracted." He glanced away, fiddling with a piece of rope in his calloused hands. "I'm fine," he mumbled. Then, in a quieter voice, he added, "No, I'm not. The bank is breathing down my neck, and I'm running out of time. Even if the orchard recovers, that money won't come in soon enough to save the farm." She placed a reassuring hand on his arm, her eyes earnest. "Is there something else we can do? Another loan? Or a different arrangement?" He shook his head, shoulders slumping. "I've tried everything. I'm at the end of my rope, Sierra." The pain in his voice cut through her. She desperately wanted to reveal her resources, to offer him a lifeline. But she was afraid of how he might react if he discovered the depth of her wealth, or if he suspected that she was simply tossing money at his problem out of pity. Yet she also couldn't stand by while he lost everything. That evening, Sierra returned to her motel, her chest tight. She knew her father might balk, but she decided to do something drastic. She placed a call to her family's financial advisor, explaining that she needed a short-term loan released in her name to secure a local property for research. She carefully avoided specifics, not wanting the news to get back to her father prematurely. Once she had the funds arranged, she intended to quietly help Luke pay off the bank, framing it as an early payment for orchard produce or a business partnership. She just hoped he wouldn't reject it outright. On a day that dawned with pale sunlight, Sierra drove to Luke's farm earlier than usual, her mind resolved. She carried a briefcase with the documents for the orchard deal, along with a cashier's check large enough to cover his arrears. She planned to present it to him gently, explaining that it was an advance against future production. She had combed through financial numbers late into the night, crafting a story that would make the arrangement seem like a legitimate investment. When she arrived, she found Luke fixing the tractor near the barn. Emily was off at a friend's place for a rare playdate. The yard was quiet, except for the hum of bees near the wildflowers that bordered the orchard. Sierra stepped out of her car, heart pounding as she approached him. He looked up, a faint shadow of worry still in his eyes. Sierra inhaled, mustering courage. "Luke, can we talk for a minute?" He wiped his greasy hands on a rag, nodding. "Sure. Everything okay?" She led him to the porch, where they sat on old rocking chairs. The wood creaked under their weight, a gentle reminder of the farm's history. Sierra took the documents from her briefcase, heart hammering. "I wanted to show you something. I've been working on a plan, a formal business arrangement. It's basically an agreement that I'd buy a significant portion of your orchard's future produce at a guaranteed price, enough to cover your immediate debts. Then we'd recoup the cost once you start harvesting. Luke frowned, scanning the papers with confusion. Sierra, this looks like a lot of money. She leaned forward, trying to keep her tone calm. It is, but it's also a real plan for you to pay the bank and keep the farm. Think of it like a contract. I provide the funds up front, you use them to stabilize your operation and get current with the bank, and then over time, you supply me with orchard goods. Any profit after that is yours to keep. He stared at her, the conflict evident in his eyes. Why would you do this? This is far beyond a few orchard treatments. I can't accept charity. She shook her head firmly. It's not charity. I'm expecting to receive produce in return. I have connections, distributors who will pay a premium for fresh, high-quality fruit once the orchard is revived. This is a business decision. And yes, I care about you and Emily, but this is not a handout. It's an investment. He swallowed hard, gripping the papers. What if the orchard fails again? What if I can't meet the quotas or the weather ruins everything? I wouldn't be able to repay you. I can't risk owing a fortune to you. That would destroy me. She reached out, covering his hand with hers. I know farming is unpredictable. That's why I'm willing to take on part of the risk. If something goes wrong, we'll handle it together. I have resources that can help mitigate losses. This is a genuine partnership offer, Luke. He turned his gaze to the horizon, wrestling with pride, fear, and a dawning hope. I don't know, Sierra. It feels too good to be true. She hesitated, then decided to lay at least part of her truth on the table. Luke, I have more means than you realize. My family is financially well off, though I like to keep it quiet. I genuinely believe in you, in your farm, and in the orchard. I'm not looking to take your land or put you in debt you can't repay. I want to see you succeed. His eyes flicked to hers, searching her face. Is that why you've been here so much? To do some good for a struggling farmer? She blushed, unsure how to phrase her response. At first, maybe I was just trying to repay your kindness. But it's become more than that. You and Emily deserve a chance to keep this place going. And I've grown attached. I can't just walk away and let you lose it all if there's something I can do to help. Silence settled over them, broken only by the soft buzzing of insects and the distant clucking of chickens. Luke closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the implications of her offer. Then he inhaled, the tension in his chest visible. If I sign this, if I take your money, it changes everything. I'm trusting you with my family's legacy. I'm letting you have a stake in what happens here. She nodded, voice trembling slightly. I know, it's huge, but I won't make any decisions without you. We'll plan everything together. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. A range of emotions flickered across his features: relief, gratitude, fear, and a hint of a deeper feeling he struggled to name. He gave a tiny nod. Okay, let's do it. I can't believe I'm saying that, but if it keeps the farm going, I'll try. A surge of warmth flooded Sierra's chest. She wanted to leap up and hug him, but she held back, sensing his vulnerability. Instead, she handed him a pen, guiding him to the line that formalized their agreement. The moment he signed, it felt as though a new chapter had begun. The tension in his shoulders released, and he drew a shaky breath as if a massive weight had lifted. She carefully tucked the documents away, then told him she already had a cashier's check for the deposit. She pulled it from her briefcase, placing it in his calloused hands. The sum was enough to cover the mortgage arrears, plus provide additional capital for further improvements to the orchard. Luke stared at it as though it was a lifeline and a heavy chain all at once. He murmured, "This? I don't know how to thank you." She brushed off his words with a gentle smile. "You just keep growing those apples and peaches, and we'll call it even." In that moment, he reached out, hesitated, then lightly touched her hand. The contact was brief, but it carried an undercurrent of unspoken emotion. Sierra's heart pounded. She realized how close they were to crossing another threshold, one that went far beyond business. She wasn't sure if it was wise to encourage the feelings blossoming between them, but she knew that her heart was no longer a passive observer. That night, as Sierra left, Luke remained on the porch long after her car disappeared. The check felt like a ticket to freedom, but also a reminder that he was now intertwined with Sierra in a way that went deeper than he'd anticipated. Part of him wondered if he was fooling himself, if maybe she'd vanish one day, leaving him tangled in debts he could never repay. Yet another part whispered that, for once, fate might be guiding him toward something good. When Sierra got back to her motel, her phone buzzed incessantly. It was her father demanding an update and wanting to know why her bank statement showed a substantial withdrawal. She took a moment to steady herself before calling him back. She spoke calmly, explaining that she had made an investment in a local orchard as part of her field research, that it aligned with their overall plan for sustainable produce partnerships. She was deliberately vague about Luke, not wanting her father's cynicism to poison what she'd begun. Robert James was irritated, but she assured him she had documentation and that this was a strategic move. He finally relented, warning her that if the orchard arrangement backfired, the blame would fall squarely on her. She hung up, her heart pounding. She couldn't predict the future, but she knew she had to stand by her decision. In the weeks that followed, Luke's foreclosure crisis receded. He paid the bank enough to buy time, and for the first time in years, he began to repair parts of the farmhouse. The orchard treatments intensified under Dr. Green's guidance, and though it would take many months to see a real turnaround, the immediate threat of losing everything had subsided. Emily sensed the shift in her father's mood, giggling more often, and talking excitedly about planting new seeds next season. Sierra split her time between finalizing the orchard deal, checking in on Luke, and quietly liaising with her father's corporation. She deflected any direct oversight, insisting she was still assessing the region. The more she immersed herself in the daily life of the farm, the more she felt a sense of belonging. She and Emily grew closer, often baking simple treats in the farmhouse kitchen or painting small wooden signs to label different sections of the orchard. Luke watched these interactions, gratitude and quiet admiration reflecting in his eyes. One late afternoon, after they finished a day's labor in the orchard, Sierra and Luke found themselves by the fence at the edge of the property, gazing at the sun as it dipped low in the sky. The air was warm, and the fading light cast a golden glow across the fields. Sierra leaned on the fence, fatigue mixing with contentment. She felt Luke's presence beside her, the heat of his shoulder nearly touching her own. The hush of the moment invited honesty. Softly, she spoke. "I don't know what the future holds for me, or for my father's business, but I'm glad I came here, that I got stuck on that rainy night. It's opened my eyes to a different way of living." He turned his head to look at her. "I'm glad you came too. You saved this place, and I don't just mean financially. You gave me hope at a time I was about ready to give up." Their eyes locked, and the unspoken feelings that had been simmering found a moment to rise. Cautiously, Luke lifted a hand to brush a stray strand of hair from Sierra's face, his calloused fingertips light against her cheek. Her breath caught, and she leaned into the touch, heart hammering. They inched closer, drawn by a current neither fully understood, but neither could deny. When their lips met, it was a gentle, hesitant kiss, blossoming from gratitude, respect, and a growing love that had taken root between orchard rows and kitchen conversations. When they finally broke apart, Luke exhaled shakily, cradling her face in his hand. She could see the swirl of emotion in his gaze, loss, hope, and a sense of wonder at letting himself care for someone again. She smiled softly, her own heart alight with a tenderness she never expected to find in a rural corner of the world. They didn't speak of it further that evening, but the fragile bond they had formed continued to strengthen in the days that followed. Sierra began spending more nights at the farm, though she kept her motel room in town to maintain a semblance of independence. Emily caught on quickly, grinning whenever she saw Luke and Sierra exchange shy smiles. The house felt more alive, laughter drifting through the once quiet living room. But complications loomed. Robert James, impatient for results, arrived unannounced at the farm one morning. Sierra was inside helping Luke fix a broken sink pipe, and they both froze at the sound of a sleek black car crunching up the driveway. She rushed outside, her heart pounding in apprehension, to see her father stepping out. He surveyed the worn property with barely concealed distaste. Luke emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a rag. Robert's sharp gaze flicked between them, noting the familiarity in their postures. He extended a polite greeting to Luke, but it was laced with coldness. Turning to Sierra, He demanded a private conversation. She led him aside, and he pressed her about the orchard investment. "I see you've gotten quite involved here," he said, eyes narrowing as he spotted children's toys on the porch and the reek of farm life clinging to Sierra's clothes. "Is this the orchard you poured our money into? Because I see a dilapidated house and half-dead trees." Sierra squared her shoulders. "We're rehabilitating the orchard, and it's already showing signs of improvement. We have a specialist from out of town who says we can salvage a good harvest in time. I'm collecting data to present a final plan." Her father crossed his arms. "All I've seen so far is you investing personal feelings in a place that might not deliver a profit. This farmer, is he your new project?" She bristled at the condescension in his tone. "His name is Luke Bennett, and he's worked this land all his life. He's an honest, hard-working man who just needed a chance. The orchard is a legitimate investment. You'll see." Robert's gaze flicked to the battered truck in the driveway, then back to Sierra. "So you're living here with him?" She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's not relevant to the discussion. My personal life doesn't affect the business arrangement." He frowned, seeing the truth in her expression. "I should have known. You're letting emotions drive your decisions again. I'm pulling out of this fiasco. We can invest in bigger, more lucrative ventures. You can salvage what you can, but I won't pour any more resources into this orchard. You can keep your share, but it won't be funded by the corporation. Understand?" Sierra's pulse raced. "I'll cover it myself. I don't need your money." He gave a bitter chuckle. "Using your trust fund, I presume?" "Fine, if that's your choice. But consider how this will look to the rest of the board. You're risking a fortune on a man you barely know." She stared at him, refusing to be cowed. "I know enough, and I believe in him, in the orchard." Robert shook his head, exasperated. "You're throwing away your resources. When you finally come to your senses, the door's open for you to come back to the city and handle real business." With that, he spun on his heel and strode back to his car, ignoring Luke's polite attempt at a farewell nod. The car sped off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Sierra stood there, chest tight, feeling the pain of her father's disapproval. Luke approached cautiously, eyes full of concern. "You all right?" he asked softly. She exhaled, turning to face him. "He's cut us off from the family corporation support. But it's okay. I still have my personal resources, and that's enough to keep the orchard plan going." Luke lowered his gaze, guilt flickering in his expression. "I don't want you to lose your standing with your father because of me." Sierra reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'd rather lose his backing than turn my back on you. I meant what I said. This orchard, this farm, it deserves a fighting chance. We can make it work, no matter what." She saw the weight of gratitude and concern etched in his features. They stood there in the driveway, the afternoon sun beating down on them. Luke gently pulled her into a loose embrace, mindful of prying eyes in the distance. She rested her head on his shoulder, letting the tension of the confrontation with her father melt away. She felt a surge of hope that, no matter the obstacles, they could carve out a future here, together. The next months tested that resolve. There were unexpected storms that threatened to ruin newly budding blossoms in the orchard. Equipment failures drained more funds than anticipated. The bank still circled, though their demands were now tempered by Luke's partial repayment. Sierra continued channeling her resources into the orchard, forging connections with distributors in regional markets who promised to buy the produce once the orchard rebounded. Despite the difficulties, a genuine sense of partnership formed between Luke and Sierra. They worked side by side, forging plans, sharing burdens, and finding small joys in the everyday rhythm of farm life. Emily thrived under Sierra's warmth and even began calling her Sierra with a note of deep affection that hinted at the motherly figure she was becoming. It wasn't official, but the love in that small household was undeniable. Sierra juggled her father's periodic calls, refusing to back down. She laid out careful spreadsheets showing the orchard's progress. While her father remained skeptical, he begrudgingly agreed not to interfere further. He still believed she would see the error of her ways, but privately, Sierra was sure she never wanted to return to the corporate environment as it once was. By the time the orchard began producing a modest but promising yield, the bank had stepped back from the brink of foreclosure, granting Luke more flexible terms. The orchard's partial harvest brought in enough income for them to pay down more debt. Sierra was relieved to see Luke's shoulders lifted from the constant weight of impending loss. Instead of desperation, his eyes now held a steady determination. Late one evening, after a productive day gathering crates of apples, smaller than the orchard's potential, but still cause for celebration, Luke invited Sierra to sit on the porch swing with him, a rare moment of leisure in their busy routine. The sky was painted in twilight hues, and fireflies dotted the yard. Emily was asleep inside, exhausted from helping stack crates. Sierra leaned against Luke's shoulder, the warm smell of hay and earth drifting on the breeze. She took a slow breath. We did it. Maybe not everything, but we're making real progress. He wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. We did it together. I can never thank you enough, but I want you to know how much it means to me, to us. She looked up at him, a gentle smile curving her lips. No need for thanks. This farm has given me something I never found in my old life. Purpose. Connection. And... She trailed off, feeling her heart pound. Love, she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small ring. It wasn't fancy or flashy, just a simple band with a modest stone, the kind of heirloom piece that might have belonged to his grandmother. Sierra's breath caught as she realized what he was doing. Sierra, I never thought I'd get a second chance at love after losing Hannah, and I never imagined someone like you would walk into my life. But you did, and you changed everything. You helped me save this farm, you gave Emily the warmth of a mother's care, and you taught me how to hope again. I don't have much to offer, but if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you've made us. Tears welled in Sierra's eyes as he took her hand. There was no grandeur, no illusions, just an honest confession of love against the backdrop of chirping crickets and starlit skies. She nodded, struggling to find words. Yes, of course I will. I love you too. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she leaned in, capturing his lips in a tender, lingering kiss. It was a promise made in the hush of farmland nights, a promise born from genuine struggle and deeper understanding. In that moment, it didn't matter that her father might never fully approve, or that the orchard's future would still demand tireless work. They had chosen each other, and that choice felt stronger than any obstacle. When they finally pulled apart, Sierra's eyes were luminous with tears and joy. Luke traced her cheek with his thumb, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. Wait until Emily finds out, he murmured, imagining his daughter's overjoyed reaction. Sierra laughed softly, leaning her head against his chest. I can't wait to tell her, and we'll handle the rest together, all of it. Below the gentle glow of the moon, they sat on that porch swing, holding each other close, aware that life would continue to test them, but hopeful that love and determination would see them through. In the months and years ahead, they would face new challenges, births of new ideas, expansions of the orchard, and perhaps more expansions of their family. But the hardest hurdles had been cleared by trust, by a single act of kindness on a rain-soaked night, and by the quiet blossoming of affection that had flourished in the simple corners of farmland life. Sierra thought back to that moment when she had first stood on a muddy road in the middle of a storm, feeling lost and alone, never suspecting that a battered truck and a struggling single dad would lead her to the greatest blessing of her life. She knew now that fate or destiny had guided her off that path, right into the heart of a man and a small child who showed her what it truly meant to belong. And as she closed her eyes, listening to the music of the night, she whispered a silent prayer of thanks for the beautiful twists and turns that life could take, for the love that could grow where least expected, and for the promise of a brighter tomorrow shared with the man who had once offered a truck to a stranded stranger.